Vă salut la acest eveniment online, al doilea din acest an din serie de discuții electorale EHUB
Hello,
2.0.
welcome at this online event, EHUB 2.0. This format involves inviting an expert to talk on a topic related to the electoral domain. This event is organized with the support of the Council of Europe, with whom we have a very good collaboration for many years, to the benefit of democracy consolidation in the Republic of Moldova. As you may probably know, the Continuous Education Center in Electoral Purpose, through its programs and activities, promotes good practices in electoral domain. This time we will speak about good practices of vote counting in some member states of the Council of Europe and of the European Union. My name is Kalugin Viorica. I'm a trainer responsible for remote training based on CIGDE, and I will moderate this live on behalf of the Continuous Education Training Center on Electoral Matters. And I'm honored to invite our today's speaker, Vladimir Misev, Council of Europe expert. Welcome, Vladimir. But until we go into the topic, I would like to introduce our speaker to our followers. So Vladimir Misev is a Council of Europe expert with a vast international experience. His basic background is in political sciences. He has a master's degree in Graz, Austria University. 2015 until 2025, he worked in the framework of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and in this quality, he followed more than 100 elections in many states. As a senior counselor, Vladimir was responsible first and foremost for the development of observations methodologies, communications of information regarding elections, and new technologies for the monitoring of online campaigns, social media. He played a key role in the electoral training activity. So thus, in the last 10 years, he trained more than 1,000 of electoral observers. Further on, he also was a lecturer in political sciences, a researcher in different expert groups. 2005-2015, he was a program director of the Institute for Democracy. 2002-2005, he was in a Northern Macedonian program together with Minister of Justice, the Parliament, and other state institutions. He coordinated the reform of electoral legislation in that country. And before I give the floor to our guest speaker, I would like to remind you that in the Republic of Moldova, the vote counting procedure is done in the polling sections manually by the members of the electoral body of the polling station. This process could be observed by the representatives of the candidates, by the accredited observers, by the electoral employees, and the journalists, accredited journalists. The results of the vote counting are included on a paper-based protocol to be signed by all the members of the electoral bureau, and then this data are introduced by the trained operators in the automatized state informational system Alegeri elections. That's in a nutshell the practice in the Republic of Moldova on the vote counting. And further on, we would encourage you to have a peek into the practices of other countries. So those of you who are following us live, you could leave us questions in the comments, but we will definitely address the questions to our guest. Mr. Misev, we are very grateful for your openness and availability. So you have the floor. We are all ears to learn more on the topic according to the program today. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Viorica. It is really my pleasure to be for the second time with you to discuss different electoral practices, the use of technologies on the first one, and this one to dwell a little bit deeper on the counting practices and counting issues. Also, once again, thank you to the Council of Europe colleagues Chisinau office for the support and invitation. And I'm quite happy to be with all of you today. I will share my screen in a second, and after my presentation, which again would last probably some 15-20 minutes, because we have a lot of information to share, we can continue with the questions. Yes, okay. You can see my screen, I assume. Great. So, yeah, as Yorika mentioned, today's topic is about the vote counting practices in some Council of Europe and European Union member states. So, let's start again with the context. What is the main purpose? And essentially, this should be a very simple topic today if we are seeing it on the surface. The main purpose of the counting during elections, of course, it is to establish the winners of the elections. As such, it makes this part of the electoral process particularly important, and it is very often subject to very strict or stringent rules. In many legislations, we would find very detailed rules about how the process of counting should be conducted. But at the same time, this process can be tense, and we've seen throughout the countries in different contexts that a lot of authorized but also unauthorized persons are present around the counting, which puts additional burden on the people responsible for the counting, which is very often the polling staff or the representatives of the political parties. So again, just to see the electoral cycle, to visualize it, where we are talking, it is in this part of the electoral cycle, the circled one or the squared one, where we have the verification of the results, and before that the voting operations and the election day. However, something that it is very important, and somebody very infamous made an infamous quote: "It doesn't matter who vote, it matters who counts." I would I would say it matters who votes, it matters who counts, but also it matters who tabulates the election result. It is election results, and the tabulation aspects would need to be taken and seen together with the counting elements. As we discussed the last time in the previous session, we saw that the technology is penetrating in all aspects of our everyday life, but also of the electoral processes, and particularly in the counting and the tabulation or the results management aspect. And as such, it needs to be dealt very diligently. It needs to be the rules, the procedures have to be updated, and we have to take into account all potential threats that are coming along with this process that in the past used to be manual. We've talked also in the past about in the previous session about the importance of the use of ICT technologies that they have on the elections, in particular in relation to the trust in elections. But the counting has probably even more importance, because very often those that are not satisfied with the outcomes of the countings, they can discredit the entire electoral process, even legitimizing the elections, if they don't have the confidence in the counting process. I have two slides for you today, just to point couple of very important aspects against which how the counting is regulated or is addressed in the international documents. What these famous international documents are telling us about the counting. The ICCPR, actually, in its general comment, which is the interpretation of Article 25 of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, it's saying that the votes should be counted in the presence of candidates or their agents. These are just extracts, these are not full quotations. And moreover, it says that independent scrutiny of the counting and access to judicial review should be provided. Obviously, the reasons for this are that there is an effective remedy, but also there should be someone independently scrutinizing the counting process, and very often these are either domestic or international observers or representatives of the main contestants. Another document which is of a political nature, but all Council of Europe member states are part of, is the Copenhagen document, which requires that the votes, the states should ensure that the votes are counted and reported honestly. So this is a very general political commitment to which all Council of Europe member states have adhered. However, because of the nature of the counting, which is a very that is a process that requires very detailed and, as I said, diligent procedures, these two documents that are produced by the Council of Europe entities have particular relevance. And these are the Venice Commission Code of Good Practice in Electoral Matters and the Council of Europe Recommendation 2017 recommendations on standards of e-voting. So the Code of Good Practice in Electoral Matters in paragraphs 45 to 49 stipulates several elements that will need to be taken into account by the legislations when regulating the counting process. And that's, first of all, that the Venice Commission Code says that preference is given to counting in the polling stations over the counting centers. And during my presentation later on, I'll go a little bit deeper into this, explaining by some concrete country examples what are the benefits of it and what are the challenges. Then the other article, it's saying, the other paragraph is saying that certain transparency measures have to be implemented, such as the presence of observers to be allowed during the counting process, but also posting of the results. It should be also allowed. Furthermore, the code requires simple and tested procedure for the counting. And in addition to that, it is required training for the polling staff that is conducting the counting. This is fundamental because the counting, as we said, at times can happen in a tense conditions. We have to keep it in mind that it is the end of the voting very often. People that are working are exhausted and they need to be trained and they have to be skilled to know the procedures instead of struggling with it. Last but not least, the Code of Good Practice requires or appeals to the polling staff to find a way to respect voter intention, in other words, to avoid unnecessary invalidation of ballots. So the voter's intention to be respected. Specifically on the e-voting and the technology used now for the counting, there are three general standards. The first one is related to the secrecy when it comes to the electronic voting, or it can be also internet voting, and that's the impossibility to connect the unsealed or encrypted vote to a voter. Then the transparency, similar to the Code of Good Practice, there should be a possibility to observe the counting, and as we saw in the previous e-hub, it is particular challenge for the observation of different voting and counting procedures when technology is involved. And the last one relates to the reliability of the system, similar to the first aspect, that is from the secrecy of the vote, that the sealed voter information should be protected until the start of the count. Very briefly, if we see throughout the Council of Europe countries, what are the general counting procedures? And you could see here, so very often the counting should start first with the sealing of the ballot box slot. So that's the hole where the ballot box has, so no additional ballots can be placed later on. There should be completion of certain protocols or parts of the protocol if it is only one protocol involved. The signatures of the voter list should be counted, and as well as the unused ballots. They should be counted and invalidated. So later on, they will not be added to the ballot box. Similar procedures should be done also with the mobile ballot box if there is a one for mobile voting. And then after that, there should be a mixing of ballots. So the secrecy of the vote would be respected in case very few mobile voters have voted. Once this is done, then it is the next step usually is proceeding towards the counting of the total number of ballots in the ballot box and then sorting the ballots. Other steps involve probably the one that the candidates and many of us are most interested is the counting of the votes, counting the outcome, which candidate received how many votes, and then finalizing and signing the protocol. In addition to that, two very important elements are the announcement of the results and the second one, again, with the transparency aspect, posting and publishing. So very often the protocols or the results have to be posted in the polling stations, but also they have to be published on the websites. On the methods of the counting, I have here three main questions. Where, how, and what, only when it's missing probably, and when we all know it as soon as possible, right? That's the interest because we all want to know the outcome of the elections. And very often, although it is not always a rule, there are certain exceptions, the counting is taking place immediately after the polls close. Where it is taking, Eureka already suggested in her opening remarks about the Republic of Moldova, but it can happen in polling stations and counting centers, or it can happen on several places. There is something also in between. How it's happening, it can be manually, it can be ICT enabled, or can be a mixture of both, again, hybrid. And what is counted, as we said, it can be counted the polling station votes, it can be mobile box votes, postal votes, but also internet votes often. So now moving on some concrete comparative country experiences, how counting is organized. And I think this exchange of experiences is probably the most valuable one for the legislators, for the national authorities, for the election management bodies, as well as for the observers, be that domestic or international, because we can find a lot of examples that can occur in other countries that we find them useful or not that useful, and we want to adopt legislation that would prevent this. I don't have, so don't worry, I don't have all the Council of Europe countries, which will be quite a lot, but I do have quite a few experiences to share here, which I think we can all draw some lessons based on. So you would see on the left side of the table, so you will have the country. The second part is whether it's a centralized counting, where the counting is taking place, how it is done, whether it's ICT equipment used or not, and some additional comments. So as you could see here, in the Nordic countries, in general, there is a mixture, let's say, of counting. The preliminary counting often is done at the polling station level, but also there is a recounting done on the electoral commissions, electoral bodies above the polling stations levels. Only in Norway, scanners are used. ICT equipment is used from the Nordic countries, but when it was first introduced, manual count was mandatory. So there was a gradual implementation of the technology. And I've highlighted it throughout the table, couple of things. So for your reference, but that doesn't mean that it is only in Finland, in other countries as well, public access is granted to the counting process. In Germany, there is no centralized counting, with exception of the postal ballots. Postal ballots are counted in counting centers, and each constituency should have at least one counting center. On the other side, then in UK, we do have counting centers, and what is particularly interesting there, although in practice it is happening immediately after the closure of the vote, but depending on the returning officer, that's the institution responsible for managing, for administering the electoral process, it can happen the following day or even during the following week. Then we have a couple of other examples. Belgium and Netherlands, they use mix method, so the paper ballots are counted at the polling stations, while in Belgium and in the cantons where new voting technologies are used or voter verified paper audit trail, the tabulation is undertaken by the canton electoral commissions. In 2024, all paper ballots are counted were counted with scanners. In Netherlands, municipalities choose whether to count the votes at the polling station level or the municipal election commissions. In Austria, as you could see, in general, there is no centralized counting, with exceptions of the postal ballots that are counted at the district level. But also, some very small municipalities can be merged together, and the counting can take place in the municipalities. So you see here Estonia and Switzerland. I've highlighted because there are certain patterns here. So that's the reason why I have circled these countries. Both countries are using internet voting, and that's why there is a mix. Otherwise, the ballots are counted in the paper ballots are counted in the polling stations. Very interesting thing that happened for the last elections in Switzerland, and again, this, as I said at the beginning, the tabulation, it's very important. 3 days after the elections, a miscalculation, a simple error mistake happened and was found in the results for the parties at the federal level, which affected the composition of the government. And this was a very benign reason. Basically, it was just a different format document that was sent for aggregation of the data, and the software doing the aggregation did not recognize the format. So the mistake has happened. But the point is, the lesson learned is that even a country that it is very advanced in the use of technologies, it can a mistake that would go unnoticed for 3 days can happen for a very simple thing, and probably the main reason is because there was insufficient testing period to do that. So that's why it is particularly important that the testing happens in all aspects of the counting, tabulation, or the electoral process when the technology is used. Some other examples we have here from Latvia, Lithuania, where in both countries we have the use of scanners. 2022 in Latvia, 75% of the polling station had ballot scanners. And since 2016, in Lithuania, votes are counted electronically. One of the problems in Lithuania is that in the last elections, the votes were counted using the same software. So if you remember of the very beginning, the international standards require independent scrutiny. So it would be ideally best if there would be a different software that would do the recounting to verify the results. Then in Malta, electronic voting and centralized counting. This is happening in a counting complex. Bulgaria and Romania. In Bulgaria, probably you are aware, there is very often elections are taking place. In the last couple of years, we had several rounds of elections, and very often there were a lot of controversies related to the use of technology. But it is fair to say that at the same time, recently there is more trust in the use of the technologies. Previous issues were dealing with issues related to the procurement, legislation, testing, audit, and certification, which ultimately affected the trust in the machines. And that's why the ballot scanners, even they had the possibility, the voting machines had a possibility to produce ballots that would be read by scanners. They were not used for counting, but these ballots were counted manually. For Romania, only Postal Vote Bureau is created centrally for each 10,000 votes. So some countries now, the last set of countries that I have here in the comparative experiences are outside of the European Union. And Mongolia, it's also outside of the Council of Europe. But you see here a tendency when it comes to the Council of Europe countries, Albania, Georgia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, there is an intention of using an ICT equipment during the counting process. Most recently, during the elections in Albania, that just happened 2 weeks ago, counting took place in 19 counting centers and one out of country, but there was also a pilot project for using ICT devices with voter verified paper audit trail. Maybe later on, if we have time during the questions and answers, I can also share my experience from the observation in the Albania in 2011. In Georgia, also for the last elections last year, 75% of the polling stations have used vote counting devices, which covered 90% of the electorate. There were a lot of controversies related to the use of the technology, although the intention of the authorities and the elected management bodies was that the introduction of the technology will increase the level of trust in the elections. And the main concerns were related to the secrecy of the vote. So when voters would place the ballot in the voting machine, not the entire ballot would be covered or not adequately covered, so somebody would be able to see the voters' intention or choice. Similar in Bosnia, there was a pilot project, and there were some security concerns where instances of we had instances when ballots were placed in the scanners, but the scanner would automatically return because it would not be able to recognize the voter's choice, and that would endanger basically the secrecy of the vote. Lastly, I've decided to include Mongolia here, although it's neither a European Union nor a Council of Europe member state, but it was a very interesting example because it has full use of ballot scanners throughout the country. But to increase trust, manual recounting of all ballots is required. What is also more interesting even is that currently the legislation does not have a provisions which count is final in case of discrepancies, whether the one provided by the machines or by the counting. Few words about one trust building measure that is becoming increasingly popular, and it's American product. It has been widely used throughout the jurisdictions in United States, and as you probably know, there are over more than 10,000 jurisdictions for administering the elections in US, and they all use different kinds of technologies, different levels of centralization. But increasingly, the jurisdictions and the legislators are introducing these so-called risk-limited audits, which are essentially meant to discover to verify the election results. So the basic precondition, as you could see here, in the chart, the basic precondition is that paper ballots or voter verified paper trail machines are used. So then the contest for audit has to be identified. There should be selected random set of ballots for audit. Then they should be compared, the selected ballots with the machine interpretation. And then there is a very simple question: whether the match provides sufficient evidence that the reported outcome was correct or it was not correct. In case it was, then the risk-limited audit stops and the outcome is confirmed. If there is no, then again, new sample is selected for audit, and that continues until full hand count is being made. This methodology, this system relies on the statistical methods. There are algorithms for that, but it has proven to be a very efficient tool, especially for building trust and confidence in the counting process. So again, very briefly, as a conclusion from these comparative experiences, what are the most common counting issues? They are from legal or procedural nature, and they are related with the sealing of the material, determining the validity of the ballot, completion of protocols, the persons present who is authorized to be present during the counting, whether the observers have access, and not only access, but meaningful access to observe. We've had examples in some countries where the observers would have an access to the polling stations, but then the table for counting would be surrounded by polling staff, and there would be no meaningful observation, or they would be placed too far. Then the challenges with the long working hours of the staff. There are countries where the polling staff had to interrupt the counting, although it was not according to the law that the counting is interrupted, or polling staff is not posting protocols or copies, or the legislation is not requiring. I've also tried to make a short comparison of the main assessments when it comes to the Republic of Moldova vote count since 2019 parliamentary elections, then the legal opinion 2022 and 2023 local elections, and the most recent 2024 presidential election and referendum. And as you could see here, the issues unfortunately are repeating, and I would say this very often are from procedural nature. So you would see that since 2019, there was an observation that there is a lack of count of the signatures and unused ballots before the counting started, or there are issues with the protocol, with the protocols, either they are pre-signed, or there would be challenges with the completion of the protocols. Instead of conclusions, a couple of words. What is required that there is a need of a robust procedures for recounting, transportation, and transfer and storage of the voting material. There should be a realistic planning by the election management bodies about the working hours, about the size and the locations of the polling stations. There should be additional training provided that the experiences have shown, particularly on the counting procedures, or the completion of protocols, or the use of the equipment for counting. Also, from the examples that we've seen, there is a need for independent audit, certification, and verification of the results. And probably very important, because we see a tendency of introducing technology, particularly during the counting process, that planned and gradual implementation, piloting and testing, it's necessary before full-scale introduction of the technology during the counting process. Once again, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I apologize for going a little bit beyond my time, but I hope it was a useful information for you, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Domnul Misev, vă
Thank
mulțumim
you,
pentru
Mr.
această
Misev,
prezentare
for this
interesantă.
interesting presentation.
Avem și noi formulate niște întrebări,
We have some
așteptăm
questions.
și întrebările
We're
celor care
looking
ne
for the
urmăresc.
others that are
În caz că le
following
au, le
this
formulează în
event
comentarii și
to
le
see if
transmitem
there are
dumneavoastră pentru a
any
le răspunde.
questions. Just a second, I
Am să
would
încep
formulate
cu o
them, and
întrebare
I
care
will
ține
start
de
with a
modalitățile
question
de
related
numărare
to
a
the
voturilor.
counting
Dumneavoastră ați vorbit
votes.
despre mai
You
multe
mentioned
modalități.
about different
Și
means,
aș vrea să ne
different
spuneți
possibilities.
care dintre
And please
modalitățile
tell me which
de numărare a
of
voturilor
the
este mai eficientă și mai
vote
lipsită de
counting
riscuri
methods
sau mai
are
rar
more efficient,
contestată, numărarea
less
voturilor în
contested
secție
or
de votare
challenged
sau în
in
centre
the
de
well,
numărare,
counting in the
numărare
polling
manuală sau
stations
cea
or in the
automatizată.
centers, automated or manual counting?
From my experience, first of all, we have to keep in mind that each country has its own specifics. And what works, as we said, in one country might not work in another country for various reasons, can be political, legal, social issues. Having said that, disclaimer, I do believe, and I agree with the recommendation from the Venice Commission Code of Good Practice, that the preferably counting should take place in the polling stations, because the polling staff is familiar with the process and the results is more manageable if they are counted on a smaller scale. It has proven in countries, in especially new democracies, when the counting is organized in a voting center, that particular elements of the counting process are not followed. Whether that can be related to the procedures or it can be related to the transparency measures with the posting of the protocols, seeing particular polling stations, or access for the observers, be those from the political parties and the candidates or the civil society. I think we cannot neglect the use of the ballot scanners and the technology. I mean, they're very efficient. They produced results very quickly, very efficiently, and that brings trust. That's the basic premise. I think we should find ways to utilize the potential. But at the same time, that's why I said that it does require piloting and testing. It does require training for the staff and for people to get used, as well as verification methods. That's why I deliberately included this risk-limited audit mechanism. So there are systems which eventually can discover discrepancies. And that's why I also mentioned the tabulation issue from Switzerland, because such a simple issue can bring certain level of distrust in the electoral results. So in conclusion, I would say that, in my opinion, counting in polling stations, it's preferable, and the use of scanners with additional, in combination with additional verification methods, be that the risk-limited audits, is probably the most preferred method of counting.
Dumneavoastră ați menționat despre
You mentioned
procedura de
about
audit.
the auditing
Dacă
procedure.
poate să ne spuneți mai multe cum
Could
are
you
loc
tell us more details
procesul de
how
audit și
the
controlul acestor
auditing
sisteme
takes
informatice în
place
țările unde
in the
acestea se
countries
utilizează în
where
procesul
they
de
are
numărare a
used
voturilor?
in the vote counting?
I mentioned that these risk-limited audits, to my knowledge, are most widely used in the US, and a lot of jurisdictions are using that. There are different systems. It can be by ballot. It can be by ballot stacks of ballots. Actually, there are different elements. How this is different methods. How this is done. There is a very interesting and useful resource material produced by the colleagues from the Carter Center. There is a guide for risk-limited audits, which details all aspects and how this should be done. But probably, I think for consideration, or a first thing for consideration should be given, it's legislating this, requiring the states to have this verification mechanism in place in order to be done. Because let's not forget that these are additional methods for verifying and confirming the results. The first element is the counting by the persons that we trust, and those are either the representatives of the polling stations with the presence of the authorized persons. And then in addition to that, we can employ this kind of techniques that can verify and can confirm the final results. That's why, for instance, sorry, just one last thought that came to my mind. That's why, for instance, you have the examples that I mentioned at the very beginning from the Nordic countries, where full recount is done by the commissions above the polling station level, when the preliminary count is done, and then the official count is done in the municipal level, and the final one on the level above that. So this is something that would need to be taken into account, but also that very much depends on the size of the country, because we cannot often afford to have the elections being postponed for a long period.
Parvin unele întrebări și de la urmăritorii noștri,
There are
domnul
some
Misev.
questions from
Haideți să
our
vedem ce întreabă ei.
followers. Let's see.
Ce tipuri de
What
fraude
types
sau
of
erori pot
frauds
apărea
or
în procesul de
errors
numărare a
could happen
voturilor?
while counting the votes?
Întreabă o urmăritoare de
That's
noastră,
one
Sorina.
question from Sorina.
There can be plenty of of mistakes that can happen. The mistakes can be on the side of the voters. We have to keep in mind that because one of the fundamental standards when it comes to the voting rights is the universality of the vote, and that means that all eligible voters, irrespective of the age, of the level of literacy, persons with disabilities, they all have the right, should have the right to vote. With that, certain challenges are coming. Very often, people, instead of being required to circle the number in front of the candidate or the name, they can cross out or put different signs. So this can be just a mistake from the can be a mistake from on the side of the voter. A voter can place a vote if there are several contests. For instance, for local elections and parliamentary, they can place ballot from the parliamentary elections in the local elections ballot box. So these are again mistakes on the side of the voters. In general, the standards are saying that the voter intention should be respected. If it is clear enough, if there is no observed manipulation, then the voter intention should be given a premium and should be respected. At the same time, there are certain mistakes and errors that can happen on the side of the polling staff. They can misplace election material while counting. That's why good practice is always that it happens this in teams of two, very often from different contestants. If there are representations from the counting staff, it's from the political parties or the electoral contestants. But even if it is not, it's always better to have it in two instead of a single person dealing with the sorting of the ballots and then counting and recounting by second person. But as I showed on the slides, including for Moldova, very often the mistakes are with the not clearly following the procedures as prescribed in the law or in the instructions of the election management bodies, and not sufficient training with completing the protocols, and then not being able to reconcile the numbers with the number of the voter list, with the signatures on the voter list, with the issued ballots, and the final results or the ballots found in the ballot box. So, as I said, very often we see these kind of mistakes happening throughout the Council of Europe countries.
Mai avem o întrebare
There's
cu
one more
privire
question
la
about
utilizarea mijloacelor,
the use of
tehnologiilor și informațiilor
ICT
în această procedură.
for this
Și
procedure.
o urmăritoare de noastră,
One
Cristiana,
follower,
întreabă,
Christiana,
există
asks,
riscul ca
is there any
utilizarea
risk
totalmente a
that the
TIC-ului în
full
procesele
use of
electorale
ICT
să
in the
excludă
election
anumiți
process
cetățeni, de exemplu,
excludes some citizens,
vârstnicii,
for instance, senior people,
persoane din medii rurale care
people from
sunt
rural
mai
areas
puțin competente
which are
în
less
domeniul
competent
digital.
in the digital sphere. How do you think?
No, this is also a very good question, and we discussed briefly the last session the use of the technology, but specifically now when it comes to the voting and counting, it can definitely disadvantage or exclude certain parts of the population, and that's why the recommendation firstly is to have a gradual implementation and introduction of the use of the technology, but also, even if it is allowed for some time at the following rounds of elections, to preserve the traditional methods of voting. And if somebody would like to vote by traditional methods, by ballot, to be allowed to do so. So again, prior to the introduction of the technology, because we are talking at the end about two most important aspects. First one is passing the sovereignty of the voters to the elected representatives, and that's very important element in a democracy. And the second one is the use of public money, where the money would be allocated. And that's why it's needed, feasibility studies are needed to be made prior to the introduction of the technology. What is the benefit of introducing a technology? If there is no benefit, maybe there is no need to introduce the technology, or which are the specific elements where this can be done. So the use of the technology, as I said, we have to be open to use the to